Thank you. And I'll try to do my best to repeat questions. Disclaimer right off the bat, I've got a lung full of pollen. It is on in full effect right now, all over us and in the air. So I need to remember to bring this with me. Want to talk about a favorite group of landscape plants for me. And thank you, Carol, for giving us these great ideas on things to talk about. But I've always been a sucker for anything that grows upright in a landscape. And coming from a background where I'm working with urban trees and trees in people's landscapes, there's a spot in anybody's garden for trees that grow upright. So thank you for the topic. So what I need to remember to do, I've got a good list going. You're going to get your steps in today. We're going to start here. There's a whole bunch right in the circle, conveniently enough, and we're going to end up over by the trial beds. So we're going to get to cover a lot of ground through the Arboretum, and focusing on fastigiate and upright growing trees, columnar trees. And Carol brought up a good point. What's the difference between a columnar tree and a fastigiate tree? And that term it's pretty interchangeable. It's used a lot for both things. And I actually had to Google it to find a better reason than just saying that. And what I found makes a lot of sense. So a columnar tree usually has a height to width ratio of 5:1. So it's usually higher than it is wide. Or it's not quite as high as a fastigiate tree. A fastigiate tree has a ratio of 10:1. So if you think of fastigiate growing really upright, making like an exclamation point, usually taller than 10 feet, that's where that fits into play. And we'll see examples of all those as we go around. What I also want to try to remember is to talk a little bit about, from a design perspective, how to use these, why they're important, the pluses and minuses of those, and kind of point those out as we go all through. Deciduous, coniferous things, so you're going to see a mix of that and some evergreens too. But a lot of what I found today is deciduous. Does that sound good? All right, we're not going to go too far. We're going to go right over here. So from a design perspective, fastigiate trees are perfect for a landscape situation where you don't have a lot of space from a width perspective, but you're not so much restricted by height. And where that ratio of 5:1 and 10:1 come into play, if you think about trees that are planted in landscapes where there are power lines, that's where you want something in that 5:1 ratio. You don't want to plant something that's going to grow up. So from this perspective, this is called getting more bang for your buck in an arboretum that's jam-packed full of things already. So a lot of these fastigiate trees were planted here on this edge to provide a screen, which is something that they're really good from a function standpoint. They fill in a narrow spot really quickly, but also not a lot of room with the existing plant material here. So if you're wondering why there's so many of them here, that's exactly why. This is a place where we could shoehorn in trees that aren't going to get real big and choke out their neighbors. They're going to do what they're designed to do and go upright. So the first one on my list, and it's a little bit naked right now, it's a Fagus sylvatica, European beech. Beeches are one of the last things to open up in the spring, and this guy's not being fooled by this warm weather. It's taking its time, and I'm glad that it is, because one of the things I like about beeches is that winter interest. They have nice silvery bark, they have delicate buds, and here you get that winter interest, which is another facet of a fastigiate or a columnar tree, is they provide that winter interest, and spring, summer, fall in some cases. This is a cultivar called Rohan's Minaret, and there's a whole series of Rohans. There's a very famous plant breeder, J.R.P. Van Hollick Smith, who did a lot of this work. He was the director of an arboretum in Belgium. And he's got a bunch of these in different colors, more round shapes. And if you see that name, that's where this came from. So this will have, when the leaves first emerge, they're burgundy, kind of a nice red, almost rivaling the Japanese maple behind us. And as they get through summer and the heat of that growing season, it'll be more of a dark green. It doesn't persist in that burgundy color. So that's this plant's claim to fame. top out at about 30 feet. So this is about as big as this will get and won't get much wider than that, nice and tight. One of the downsides of a lot of fastigiate or columnar trees is they have those tight and narrow crotches that are susceptible to snow load, to ice, and wind damage. Beeches are notoriously very, very tough, dense wood, so this one doesn't suffer from that as much as some others. And we'll end with an example one that is destined to fall apart if we have a snowstorm. And I'm going to talk really bad about it when we get there. But that's the first one that I wanted to share. The next one is its neighbor right next to it. This is Acer Saccharum Barrett's Cove, Apollo Sugar Maple. And this one has come up on my Plant Lovers Tour multiple times. It has great fall color. It's one I talked about, I think, the last time I did this. But again, that's more of what I would consider a columnar tree. That's about as big as this guy's going to get. It's going to stay nice and tight like that. A little bit more susceptible to wind and snow, but again, winter, spring, summer, fall, it fits that notch for me very, very well. The other one right behind me is one of the first oaks that I want to talk about. This is Quercus palustris Prin Green. It's the green pillar columnar pin oak. And have to confess, I'm not a big fan of pin oaks. They get a lot of foliar diseases. They're in the red oak family. I tend to lean towards white oaks from an urban tree standpoint. But this is a really good one. In any garden I've ever worked in, this one performs really, really well. Nice and tight. That's about as wide as this guy's ever going to get. We had one at Swarthmore College that was probably 30 feet tall, but not any wider than that. It was absolutely beautiful in the wintertime. Great fall color, which is another one of its attributes that I like a lot. And to get an oak to take up that much space, that's kind of a big deal in most landscapes. If you think about a lot of people's new homes, the yards are shrinking, and fastigiate columnar trees really fit in those landscapes really, really well. Really, really good one. Not as easy to find as some of the other oaks, but I love the fall color and the look of that one. Some of the question was, is it common for it to sucker? A lot of times these trees are grafted, so you'll see at the base, that's suckers from the rootstock. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. Any other questions? All right, we're gonna keep rolling in that direction. First one over here I wanna talk about, it's not the prettiest thing, but it's kind of unique, and I didn't even know what it was until today, I'm embarrassed to say. This is Colereteria paniculata, the golden rain tree. And from a recommending tree standpoint, Colereteria is usually not one that I tell people to plant. They can be very weedy, they seed in and spread around quite frequently. They produce those little capsules that look like, it's sometimes called the Chinese lantern tree, those little capsules with the seed pods in it, but they're voracious seeders. They seed in all over the place. This is a fastigiate one called, oddly enough, fastigiata. So very, very tight, stays in that nice kind of plane, doesn't spread out, takes up small space in the landscape. Worth mentioning it here because it's kind of placed here to kind of look and compare to other ones. And this is also a good example of, from an Arboretum standpoint, how we evaluate plants. We talk about that a lot, and it's really kind of hard to point out, but this is the perfect instance where you can stand in one spot and see multiple species of trees that are fastigiate and upright growing, and we can kind of evaluate those over time to say, that one's really good, that one's starting to splay apart, that one's shooting up a lot of root suckers, that's a horrible kind of a weedy mess, and it's kind of doing what they do. The branches kind of spread apart as they get older, but I think a good effort for a tree that's kind of roguish. It's interesting enough to at least mention it to me. And right next to it is probably one of the more well-known fastigiate trees, and one that I like to recommend quite a bit. This is liquid ambar styraciflua. It's our native sweet gum, and it's a cultivar called slender silhouette. Most people hate sweet gums because of the gumballs, the fruit, and I tell people if you plant this, they don't fall very far. They're easier to rake up because they fall right down at the base of the tree. This has kind of an interesting story that's worth mentioning. I'll try to tell it quick because it's hot here. And I don't know if this is true because plantsmen are notorious liars, but this was found by a very famous plantsman, Don Shadow. And the story goes he was fishing on a river and they saw this fastigiate tree growing along a river. They went over to it and saw that it was a sweet gum and took a handful of cuttings, put them in the canoe with mine to go back at a better time to collect them, went back to collect them and somebody had cut the tree down to go across the stream. Yeah. So if they hadn't have found those, this tree never would have made it to the industry. Again, I don't know if that's true or not, but it's a good story. But a really good urban tree. Sweet gums are bomb-proof in any kind of soil. They have nice fall color, good solid green leaves in the summertime. That's an interesting texture for the winter. So what's not to love about that from an urban tree standpoint? You do see them kind of splay and shoot branches out like that. And I was doing a tour one time and somebody complained to me about, they all do that and it's messy. And the easiest way to fix that is with a pole saw, is just to clip off the branch. If that branch going out that way bothers you, you can just clip it off. They don't all do that, but sometimes they're kind of prone to branches kind of splaying and going out. I've never seen one of these lay down in the snow. I've never seen one of them fall apart in the ice. It's a tough bomb-proof tree and a good urban tree to take up just a small amount of space. Any questions before we shoot across the parking lot?
What was the name of that cultivar?
Slender Silhouette is the name of the cultivar. And since we're talking about sweet gums, this is another, I would call this more columnar. This is about as big as this guy's gonna get, a little more round than upright. This is Liquidambar styraciflua, and it's Clyde's form, also called Emerald Sentinel columnar sweet gum. A little bit wider than Slender Silhouette, has kind of a nice oval shape, which I like. Again, nice fall color. That's interesting texture to me from a winter standpoint. You can see maybe it produces a few gumballs. There might be one or two on the ground. But again, they're not falling that far. They're pretty easy to rake up and move. But this tree is not taking up a lot of space in the landscape. It's gonna do well in this kind of urban situation. And this thing is perfectly happy here. Doesn't need a lot of aftercare, planted at the right depth. Weed tough love, there's no irrigation out here. And this thing's perfectly happy. Just a really good urban tree, the genus Liquidambar. I mentioned a tree I was going to talk poorly about, and that's our next one right behind it. This is a pyrus. It's a pear tree, and I think it's an NC State selection. It's one called Javelin. It's the fastigiate pear tree. So you can see how tight those crotches are. They're kind of long. I would think something like this would just absolutely fall to pieces if it got snow load on it, or if it was super wet with its leaves and a windy situation. Bradford pear are notorious for kind of falling apart. I had a smaller version of this in the garden that I worked in before, and we did a little bit of selective pruning on it when it was younger to try to eliminate some of those super tight crotches in there. It's, from a fastigiate tree standpoint, it's kind of nice. It flowers like pears do, pretty good fall color, but it's hard to get past that that family heritage of what the Bradford pear has done in an urban landscape and kind of escaped. But worth mentioning, again, we're an Arboretum, we're trialing, we're looking at these things, we're evaluating, and this is the perfect situation to put that in. It's in good company with some good ones, and let's see what it's gonna do. Any questions? All right, we're gonna head that way. Lori, these might be the only conifers I talk about. I got all excited about the ones in the circle and some other ones. And that's worth mentioning. There are a lot of conifers that fit the columnar fastigiate. Pretty much any form that you want, they build it in a conifer. Weepers, tall ones, wide ones, probably the broadest range. And these are two that I like a lot for a couple reasons. This is Juniperus virginiana silver spear, and I want to say that's one that Mark selected, and I think Tony has produced it, but it's a native. That's a super tight form of virginiana. There are several fastigiate ones. There's one called Brody, there's one called Emerald Sentinel, and I really, really like this one. The first place I ever saw one was at Tony's many, many years ago, and they've worked on it, and it's a really, really good conifer for the garden. Again, doesn't take up a lot of space, forms a really nice accent if you want a tree to do that, to make a statement. This is a perfect example of that. It will get cedar apple rust. That's a host that it shares with things in the apple family. I haven't seen that here, but that's a good segue into our next one. Right next to it is an apple, a crab apple, and it's one from J. Frank Schmidt and Sons called Raspberry Spear. It's a relatively new one. I don't know a lot about it. I got that as a trial pack when I was in Charlotte, and it stays nice and tight like that. Not a lot of movement as of yet, but again, we're keeping our eye on it to kind of see what it does. It's starting to spread out a little bit, so the jury's out as to how wide it gets, but according to them, it stays really, really super narrow. That's a perfect example of something to make as an accent or a statement. You could even do that in a bigger container if you didn't have the space and wanted a small flowering tree. You get the nice flowers, you get that reddish foliage, and the fall color on this one is reds and yellows and oranges kind of all at the same time. So they do come in flowering packages too, and I'm glad that we have one to show. Directly behind us, we could spin around. This is a crepe myrtle cultivar. It's one of the Witt series. Witt is a breeder in Oklahoma, and this one is pink velour. Kind of a stretch to call it fastigiate or columnar, but it is more upright growing than spreading. There are a few small upright growing crepe myrtles, and wanted to use this as kind of a segue to promote that there are other flowering plants out there that provide that same kind of look or take up that same kind of space in a garden. If you think about most crepe myrtles, they're much more broad and vase-shaped. This one stays nice and tight in the realm of crepe myrtles, and there's some small ones that stay even smaller, but wanted to mention this since we are here. This is Carpinus betulus fastigiata. That's an old school fastigiate tree. That's the first one I learned in plant ID class at Virginia Tech. It's been around for a really long time. It's older than me, which means it's been around for a long time, and it's a good performer. That's why it's still around and still available. I see this used all over the country. I helped with a big project in Philadelphia where they're planting these big tree pits along the Avenue of the Arts. And this is a tree that they wanted to use, and I think they still have them down there. So it's a really good urban tree. Carpinus are traditionally a tough plant in the landscape. Nice texture, just starting to leaf out. Solid green color through the growing season. Nice yellows in the fall. And the winter interest on that is really, really pretty. There's a bunch of cultivars out there. In addition to fastigiata, they've done a lot of work with this to make smaller ones, tighter ones, but they all perform very, very well, and it's a favorite of mine to recommend. Any questions before we move on? Yes. The question was, how do the junipers handle snow and ice in the wintertime? They're usually pretty tough. Ice is a hard thing to battle, and I actually did a trial in my previous job where we took that plastic deer fence and we wrapped fastigiate conifers with that. Some of them we supported with poles on either side, others we just wrapped, and that wrapping kept them so that the snow would shed off, and if they did get ice on them, it was just the outside. Not everybody can do that though, but that was a good deterrent for things. Also, if you get something that's that big, it's going to be a little bit harder to do. It's one of those things that's really, the deciduous trees usually do a better job of shedding the snow. It's got some place to grow. The crotches are more angular and tighter. A really good friend of mine, Andy Pulte at University of Tennessee, really promotes pruning conifers when they're younger, because if you look at them, they'll develop multiple leads inside, and that's what pulls apart. So that's something that it was revelatory when he told me that, but it makes a lot of sense. When it's younger, get rid of some of those multiple stems when they're small so the tree can kind of fill out naturally and you still have that form, but you're not going to have something that's going to pull apart and leave its neighbors up and exposed to the elements.
So do you recommend, like on these, to actually wrap it?
If you want to keep that from happening, if we're going to get an ice storm, that's something that you can do. But you can't leave it on. You gotta take it off, and it's pretty labor intensive. But
You might save your tree.
You might save the tree, exactly. This one, I'm not sure how tall they eventually will get. It's a newer one to me. I think the ones at Tony's are 15, 20 feet tall. They're bigger than these.
Thanks.
That was a good question. Anybody else? Let's keep on trucking. So another evergreen, broadleaf evergreen, that's good for landscapes. There aren't any southern magnolia cultivars that I don't like. I like all of them equally. This is a cultivar called Alta, and its claim to fame is it's fastigiate. That's pretty broad and oval. I think that's stretching that definition a lot, not a little bit, a lot, but it's sold as a fastigiate southern magnolia. In the realm of southern magnolias, it stays nice and tight. It sends most of its energy upwards, not out. We've not pruned this away. That's kind of the natural form of this cultivar. A better one, which we don't have within walking distance, is a cultivar called Hassie. That's a true fastigiate southern magnolia. It's harder to find because it's hard to propagate. And Tim reminded me today of two instances, and this is the first one, that I cut a whole bunch of Hassie down when we cut the trees down to build the berms. So can't show you those. I'll tell you the other one when we get to it, but still, this is still a good tree for more of a tighter form. And if you think about southern magnolias, how broad spreading they can come, this one is a little bit more well-behaved and grows kind of upright. These do really good. I like to recommend this as a screen, 5 or more of them, kind of stagger them, and they fill up space quite well and stay nice and dense. So a good one from that aspect. And another thing that fastigiate columnar trees can be used for is as a screen. The question was, would I consider little gem or teddy bear columnar? I need to retract my previous statement about liking all southern magnolias. I don't like little gem very much at all. Apologies to little gem and to any of you who like little gem. There are lots of better ones, but if this is considered fastigiate, little gem doesn't get much wider than that, and teddy bear is even tighter. But those are kind of more oval, I think, more oval shapes. I had a row of them in my last garden, and they were not little at all. They were very wide and shorter in stature. They don't get quite as tall. Really good flowers. They always produce good flowers, but I've seen them planted in commercial landscapes where they get kind of squat and wide. Teddy bear, its claim to fame is it's really dense and has a nice green leaf and a nice brown backdrop. That's a favorite of mine, but it doesn't have as many flowers, and this doesn't have many flowers on it either. That's kind of one of the downsides. Hassie that I mentioned, which is a really good fastigiate, doesn't produce a lot of flowers either. It's has that really nice, tight, upright growth, kind of like teddy bear.
What's the furthest north that do well in?
This is I would say this one doesn't do well much further north than, I don't know, you see them in Philadelphia now. There are a couple of super cold hardy ones. There's one called Bracken's Brown Beauty that is probably the best cold hardy of the southern magnolias. There's another one, I can't think of the name of it, that they developed at the Raulston Arboretum that does really well too. But Bracken's Brown Beauty is the one that, and it's all relative. It's amazing what we can get away with now. Our zone has changed twice since I've lived in North Carolina, and I mean it's 80 degrees today. The first week of April. So there's a lot of research out there on the cultivars that's doing a better job explaining it than I am right now. But Bracken's Brown Beauty is probably one of the most cold hardy ones. Anybody else? We're gonna go up the perennial border. I may be getting my facts wrong, but I think most of the peaches we have in the garden were developed here at NC State. This is Corinthian Pink. I'm pretty sure it's an NC State introduction, and a true fastigiate peach tree. We've got some dwarfs on the other side of the path over there that do really, really well. This guy's claim to fame is big, fat, double pink flowers. And then the new growth emerges, this really pretty burgundy color and very, very tight. Somebody's building a nest in there, but very, very upright. This is a tree that peaches and cherries are short-lived, and this is a relatively short-lived tree, 20 years, 30 years maybe. And they do this thing where they start to lean as they're ending their lives. We had one further down that started to do that, but this one's still relatively young. It'll get about 20 feet tall, won't get much wider than this, but it's a perfect spot for it here in the border where you've got all the perennials doing the work, and this is just being pretty in the backdrop, which is what you want. It fills in this void back here. It also helps kind of separate this space from the white garden where we have lots of events. That's why this was planted here. So a good use of a fastigiate tree. And I like this because of the flowers and the size of it. The foliage is pretty too. Any questions?
Leaf color consistent through the season?
It starts to fade later in the summer to more dark green, but pretty good. Better than some things. I think we're going over there next. This is a plant genus that I've been in love with since I learned it. This is Perodia persica, Persian ironwood, and there's a lot of work being done with cultivars of this because it's a really, really tough plant. It's in the witch hazel family, so it has a similar flower. You can look at the leaf and see it looks very much like a witch hazel or a fothergilla, which it's related to. A multi-stemmed tree, incredible fall color, lots of variation. I have colleagues that work at Denver Botanic and Chicago Botanic that have collected this in the wild, looking for different shapes and sizes. This is one called Golden Bell Tower, and it gets that name from the fall color, which is bright, bright yellow, and it stays nice and tight. Perodia typically kind of spreads out, has lots of leads to it, and it's a plant that has really, really tough wood, hence the common name ironwood. I did a trial at a garden I worked at where we tried to prune these back to a central lead, and they absolutely hated it. They fought it tooth and nail. They like to have lots of stems, crossing branches, all those things that we're taught are bad for a tree. This one can take it and keep on going. You're wasting your time if you try to get it under control. Just plant it, stand back, and enjoy the fall color, the kind of unusual flowers in the spring, but the fall color is what this is known for. And the bark is kind of nice in the wintertime. It kind of peels and it foliates, kind of like a Korean dogwood, has a very similar bark to that. But a personal favorite of mine. Any questions before we move out of the earshot of the mower?
How tall does it get?
This one, I'm not sure of the ultimate height. Regular old Perodia can get to be about 30, 40 feet tall. And this, you get all those nice attributes in a much smaller, tighter package.
You ever seen the crossing branches graft?
This, a lot of things in this family of plants will do that. Beeches, another one. And because that wood is so tough, it'll just graft itself together and it makes it strong. Anybody else? All right, let's cut through the rose garden. So again, another vantage point that illustrates what we do as an evaluation arboretum. Just taking advantage of bed space in front of a fence line, we have a whole series of oaks planted here that are fastigiate oaks, all different cultivars, all within eyesight of each other, so we can stand here, we can look at all of them and kind of evaluate how well they do, how they perform, what they look like in the fall, the winter, all those things. Before I talk about those, there's somebody crashing the party here that's worth talking about. Not a fastigiate tree. This is my one of my favorite red buds. This is Oklahoma red. Oklahoma red? Appalachia red, I'm sorry. That's about as red as you can get for a red bud. And it really stands out from the normal colored red buds. It's about as close as you can get. This is an older one. I like the form of it. Really, really pretty right now. And they seem to be a little bit later than the native ones. But when they come out, it's quite a statement and worth honoring and talking about. So this is a part of the Arboretum that I don't think gets as much attention as it should. And we've got a lot of things that we're working on to make this more of a place to come and visit. So that's reason enough right there. The other reason are the oaks that I want to talk about. So a lot of work has been done in the white oak family. They're a little bit more disease resistant, a little bit better in urban landscapes, and a little bit faster growing in the realm of oaks. And Quercus bicolor white oak is one of the parents that's used quite a bit, has good fall color, grows quickly, very, very soil adaptable. So directly behind me is one of those white oak Quercus bicolor, Quercus warrii crosses, and this wins the name for plant cultivar name. It's called Skinny Genes, genes with a G, G-E-N-E-S. And very, very tight. This is the biggest one I've ever seen. Of all the ones that I have personally evaluated, that's the one that always died first for me. But that one's happy where it is because it's been in the ground for a while. That again, the biggest one I've ever seen, really, really, really tight. The attributes you get is that really pretty winter interest, pretty good consistent green foliage of the leaf, white underside that moves in the wind, and typically a really good burgundy fall color. They can be marcescent, which means they hold on to their leaves through the fall, so you get that brown color, which I think is good, and a little bit of sound in the wintertime when the wind blows through it. And sometimes they just drop all their leaves. It's kind of no rhyme or reason to it. One that I do really like for a couple reasons is this next one over here. This is Quercus kindred spirit. The two folks that did the breeding work on this were friends of mine. Josh Nadler, who I worked with at Bartlett, he works in Baltimore. This was his baby, and it's a really, really good one. Very, very tight, holds up well in winter. Sometimes they send out those rogue branches. Again, that's an easy with a pole snip, but this one doesn't do that as much as some of the other ones. Nice fall color. I just like that texture and that closeness that they provide. Again, a good tree to not take up a lot of space in the landscape. The last one that I want to talk about is right next to it over here. Another one in that line of genetics with warrii. It's one called chimney fire, and kind of a bad name, not something you want to happen or think about, but the fall color on this is obviously a bright red. You can see that it's a lot more splayy, it moves a lot more, which I think is going to lend itself to kind of falling apart in bad weather. Again, for me personally, of all the ones that I've looked at over time, that's one that I'm not real fond of just because of that. It just is a little bit more unkempt. One that is one of my favorites next to kindred spirit is one that we don't have planted back here, and one that Tim also reminded me. I cut down several over when we cleared up for the berms, so I can't show it today. It's one called Regal Prince, and that is one to, if you're looking for a fastigiate oak that you get a lot of bang for your buck, that's one that I tell people to get. A little bit wider than kindred spirit, a little bit more loose, but equally tight. Incredible fall color, nice bark, nice winter interest, wet soil, dry soil, a really, really adaptable oak. So kindred spirit and Regal Prince are the two fastigiate oaks that I like to tell people to plant, and they're pretty easy to find in the industry. That's the whirlwind spring blown tour for the days. Anybody have any burning questions about fastigiate trees or anything for that matter? Yes.
And most of these trees take part sun or do they all want full sun?
Most of them, I would say, full sun. Perotea, you can get away with a little bit of shade. The oaks need full sun to kind of do their thing. The carpinus, you can get away with a little bit of shade. Sweet gums like more sun to do their thing. Most of these need sun. The juniper, I think you could get away with some shade with that one because it doesn't get real big. If it got some filtered light, I think you could definitely get away with that. And there's other conifers too that you could plant that you could get away with shade. Cephalotaxis, there's a fastigiate one. There's also, we just planted one in front of the Japanese garden. Portocarpus. Yeah, there's a lot of those that are, yeah. Any other questions? Well, thank you for coming out this afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you.